I'm Torsten Hoffmann, an award-winning filmmaker, entrepreneur, and techno-optimist.
Lucy got over my shoulder.
I'm really into emerging technologies and how trillion-dollar industries are forming around them. Right now, the space sector is going ballistic. And trust me, it's way bigger than Musk and Bezos.
There were headlines, new era private industry is going to lead the way. No, they're not.
So allow me to whirl you around the world, catapult you into orbit, and hurl you through space. You ready?
Man.
This space renaissance isn't just fueled by governments. Hundreds of companies are competing for fame and fortune.
SpaceX were the first private company to put a satellite in orbit. We were the second.
9.
Oh my God.
My mommy could be an astronaut.
Meet the next generation of astronauts, the new faces of new space.
So you're literally a rocket scientist?
Yeah.
8.
A CubeSat can be as small as this.
Launching into space for, say, $100,000 or $200,000.
So why is this guy spending $2 billion on 3 huge satellites?
Okay, one question. Are you crazy?
No.
7.
New constellations are filling the skies.
This is creating $1 trillion market opportunity, and the list is really endless.
Tracking climate change and tackling geopolitics.
6.
I think it will change the political calculus going forward if everyone gets to know that these things aren't going to be possible to hide anymore.
5.
Dying satellites can now be saved.
I deorbited dozens of spacecraft. Well, we don't have to do that anymore.
We don't have the right to make mistakes because it would be fatal.
But debris puts it all in danger.
This is kind of scary to think about something like this re-entering and maybe hitting a populated area.
4.
In our future, asteroid mining is a thing.
The amount of platinum group metals out there is in the trillions of dollars.
3.
Maybe someone is already building a space hotel, like the one I read about as a kid.
Torsten, this is happening. We are building a space station.
2.
And we use the inedible part of the plants to feed the insects, which create the substrate for the mushroom.
My role and purpose is to help save the DNA of Earth and spread life to the stars.
1.
If the public does not see the value of this, immediately, I will work to ensure that they do.
Roger that.
Let's meet those turning science fiction into science fact. A little space history. The first rockets were built in Hitler's Germany. But let's not talk about Operation Paperclip here. The Russians were leading the early space race. Sputnik, the first object in orbit. Scary. Yay, gold medal. Sputnik 2 had the first creature in space, Laika the space dog. Sadly, she gave her life. Then Yuri, the first man in orbit, 100 minutes. Alexei did the first spacewalk. And then Valentina, the first woman in space, for 3 full days.
The Soviets sent this little sturdy guy, hi Sheldon, around the moon. And he made it back safely.
Seriously, guys, the Russians were killing it. But then President JFK mobilized 400,000 Americans.
But it will be done.
And a lot of taxpayer money, and made the ultimate moonshot possible. The Apollo board computers had less memory power than Shelley's birthday card.
Yes, back then the future was bright. We actually built nuclear reactors and supersonic jets. And the airline Pan Am even took reservations for tickets to the moon. No kidding.
Take 5. It's amazing to me that it took humanity only 12 years from a small Russian ball of steel in low Earth orbit to 12 Americans with, well, balls of steel to walk on the moon. 12 years.
That's faster than getting a permit for a new bridge in my town today. But after the achievements of Apollo, some say NASA lost its thrust. Per kilogram of payload, the space shuttle of the 1980s was 10 times more expensive and less reliable than the rockets from the 1960s. We're skipping ahead a few history chapters, but eventually it was high time for competition from the private sector.
Jeff Bezos was inspired by sci-fi legend Robert Heinlein. Maybe when he grows up, he can build his own rockets and go to space.
Back in 2000, Bezos founded and fully funded Blue Origin. And 21 years later, his dream finally came true. Some critics say that the billionaire's Blue moves too slow. Oh, hi, Shelly, buddy, is that you? Well, if Bezos is the tortoise, then this guy is the hare. Love him or hate him, SpaceX reached orbit in fast and furious fashion. Only 6 years after Elon Musk founded and funded it in 2002.
Legends of science fiction like Isaac Asimov were foundational to Elon Musk as a kid. Maybe humanity could be saved on a galactic scale.
Yep, the billionaires sure are getting a lot of heat from the media.
Tech unicorns, but why deflate the union? One man saving humanity. Come on, that's just insanity.
Cut it out, guys. This is a serious documentary. We don't care about drama and all this gossip. Oops. Window broke again. Sorry, Elon. Ouch!
Tunnels are boring, regulators ignoring, solar energy storing, outer space exploring, flames are throwing, brains are poking, dope smoking with Joe Rogan.
Ah, stop it. That's our TikTok video. Seriously though, the new space barons were early, piling billions into this space 20 years ago. Long before there was a market, launch was dominated by the government and military. Slowly, other private initiatives took off.
My name is Anusha Ansari, and I'm CEO of X Prize Foundation.
In 2004, Dr. Ansari funded the X Prize competition to build a spaceship, fly 3 passengers 100 kilometers to the edge of space, and return. Twice in 2 weeks, without a dime of government support.
26 teams from 11 countries competed. $100 million was spent by the teams to win a $10 million prize. And most people thought it's impossible. They called us crazy. A lot of people told me that you're going to get people killed. What are you doing? And to me, it was, a risk worth taking because it was about future of humanity.
The winning team was financed by billionaire Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen and acquired by debonair billionaire Sir Richard Branson, who quickly christened it Virgin Galactic. We'll get to space travel in a minute. The point here is that competition leads to dropping costs. Today, there are hundreds of competing rocket companies hoping to reach escape velocity, but SpaceX towers over them all. That one company, controlled by a singular man, hauls 5 times more payload than all other countries and companies combined. Ha! And now all eyes are on Elon's even bigger frickin' rocket, Starship. Meanwhile, NASA is back on the launch pad. The new mega rocket, SLS, destined for the moon,
and liftoff of Artemis 1,
uses leftover engines from the Space Shuttle program. But with each launch, 2 of them are thrown away into the ocean. Imagine discarding an airplane after each flight. That's why this version of SLS can only fly a total of 8 times.
And so now we're seeing some more of that video of the external tank.
No wonder launch costs are 40 times higher than what private rocket companies advertise. Because the real key for lower cost is reusability. Since first landing boosters in 2015, SpaceX has done it hundreds of times and offers the cheapest access to orbit.
SpaceX were the first private company to put a satellite in orbit. We were the second. We're often asked, who do we see as our competitors? And really, it's only SpaceX if we're honest about it.
Peter didn't go to university and instead cut his teeth building jetpacks and bicycles with rocket propulsion. He founded Rocket Lab in the most unlikely of places, New Zealand. His home country lacks robust venture capital, and don't they have strong regulations there?
That's right. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Torsten.
I do also hear sometimes a little bit of criticism about the fossil fuels that are being burned.
We have more carbon emissions from the diesel generators at the launch site than we actually do from the rocket. But like I say, for one launch for us is the equivalent of going from LA to San Francisco, and I don't know how many 100 flights there are that a week, but tremendous number.
Rocket Lab has an impressive track record and a stellar reputation, but
Does what you guys are doing even matter if a company like SpaceX is pulling up 200,000 kilograms a quarter?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. And, you know, the reality is, as I mentioned to you before, like if you've got you have to get a satellite to a particular destination for it to be commercial. So piling up, you know, 100 tons of satellites and dumping them all out in one spot doesn't make a business. It's kind of got all of the advantages and disadvantages of riding a bus. So, you know, you don't get your schedule certainty. The bus arrives when it arrives and it leaves when it leaves. You might be sitting beside someone smelly, but it's cheap.
Right, so you won't see Peter taking the bus anytime soon. His company is like a white-gloved limousine service. Personally, I am more of an Uber guy.
We are kind of Uber in space, just a little bit more complicated. For example, when Falcon 9 delivers a bunch of satellites to the target orbit, Falcon 9 deploys all these satellites into space. But this specific orbit might not be ideal for the small-sat customer. So we need to use our OTV to take all these satellites to their custom destinations. We've launched over 100 satellites with SpaceX over the last couple of years. But we are open to work with everyone, and a lot of emerging players will enter these fields very soon, and we can't wait to launch with all of them. I'm in charge of the commercial success of the company, of like sales, BD, our contracts with our customers, with our launch vehicle providers. Yeah, surprisingly, we are a self-funded company and we've been profitable from day one, which is like a very unique case for the industry.
This German company has deployed more than 350 satellites for over 60 international customers. The wait time for ExoLaunch's rideshare, lifting you to low Earth orbit, LEO, can be as fast as 4 to 6 months. But time is money. So if you're in a hurry, there's an express from Texas.
I'd always been making engine sections, I'd been building engines, I'd been integrating vehicles, but I'd never made fire. And then that was the next step for me, was to be the mother of rockets, to make fire.
The US Space Force wanted to demonstrate the capability of launching payload on short notice.
Got a phone call and it said, you are launching to this orbit, which we had not known before. Go ahead and get ready. In 24 hours, you have to launch a rocket exactly in this 3-minute window. So it's actually more like a 10-second window, 24 hours out.
Well, when they pointed at us and said, go, we were able to get done in 24 hours what previously had never been done faster than 21 days. This company, Firefly, we did that.
There's nothing both more exciting and more terrifying than when the rocket leaves the pad and she's moving and you're not just testing, and she's actually lifting off.
The most precious payload is people. Someone beat the billionaires to space by 15 years.
I grew up in Iran wanting to become an astronaut. As a young girl, becoming an astronaut, of course, was a big dream for me, but my parents thought it's impossible. I sort of hung on to that dream and wanted to make it come true.
Dr. Ansari trained as a Soyuz astronaut and for a few $1 million bought herself a ticket to ride. She spent a full 9 days aboard the ISS. That's 140 times around the planet, fulfilling her dream. These new companies and an influx of investment created modern-day space tourism. You can follow it on a screen near you. Even Captain Kirk was beamed up.
What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine.
Whether you think billionaires should ascend to the heavens or go to hell.
Maybe Bezos shouldn't be allowed to return to Earth.
Their fat wallets have kicked open space travel for more of us. And some are really into it. My friend Dylan, a space entrepreneur and a leading figure in the new space economy, was one of the first to go with Blue. And he has an appetite for more.
I'm a ticket holder on Virgin Galactic, I think number 642 in line. Space Perspectives, which is the high altitude stratospheric balloon, and Worldview. The first space investment I made was about 2007, which was very early for this industry. And my friends at the time in finance were sort of snickering, you know, you're investing in asteroid mining and all these crazy ideas. And of course, those same friends now call me today for investment advice and tips, which I think is hilarious. I had an opportunity just coincidentally to dive to the Mariana Trench, to the Challenger Deep, which is something I don't think you can say no to. We actually went to a part of the Mariana Trench that no humans had ever been to.
Beautiful. Wow, look at that.
And so it was like exploring another planet.
Astronauts often describe a profound moment of awe. Frank White dubbed it the overview effect. So that others can experience it, Dylan founded the non-profit Space for Humanity, which aims to democratize access to space by giving tickets to those who could otherwise not afford it.
So it was really founded around this idea of getting citizens to space, but for the benefit of Earth. Everyone seems to be profoundly impacted by this experience. I know I was. I think you come back a changed human. I think you come back a better human. So how do you change people's perspective? You get as many people as you can to space.
I really wanted to talk to Space for Humanity's first citizen astronauts. So we crashed Dylan's birthday party and set up shop in the corner office.
I've dreamt of the moment when we get to tell someone that they're going to be our first citizen astronaut. Right now is that moment, Katya. And you're going to be our citizen astronaut #1, and you're going to space.
Congratulations. Oh my God. My mom is going to freak out.
My name is Katya Echazareta. I am an electrical engineer.
So you're literally a rocket scientist?
Yeah. I am a citizen astronaut with Space for Humanity, and through that, I also became the first Mexican-born woman in space. Living through that and going through that experience and being able to actually see our planet.
I had what I guess you would call an epiphany. The Earth is a whole system, everything's interconnected, we're a part of it. And I thought, okay, it's the overview effect. We're all astronauts on Spaceship Earth.
Oh my God. That image of the Earth. It was just burned into my eyelids for days.
Your pick? Yeah.
For me, I remember that I had just such big dreams. And so with my salary at McDonald's, with my mom cleaning houses, with both of us walking dogs, with me grading papers, with me doing tutoring, that's how we paid for a family. This is really important because for the first time in human history, we're seeing organizations take the lead in this way, like Space for Humanity, of sending very talented, qualified individuals to have this space experience, to come back empowered and do something to help the world.
Oh my God, can I show you?
Yeah.
I am Sarah Sabri.
I'm going to space.
I am the first Egyptian and the first African woman and the first Arab woman to ever go to space. I have a background in mechanical engineering, worked in aerodynamics on Formula 3 car body designs, and then did my master's in biomedical engineering, and then worked in stem cells for a while, and then also on robotic surgery. Now, when I look at the sky, it just feels very, very different. It's not that big anymore. Like, it's kind of weird to say that, but it feels manageable. Like, it really, really touches you. It's not something that you just look at, you know? It's really, like it's there. We're right here.
So we pay for their tickets, but in return, they've got to come back to Earth and do something, a fellowship benefiting Earth linked to one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
The more I got into the space field, the more I realized how inaccessible it was for people like me. I don't have a US citizenship, I don't have a European citizenship, so I decided to do something about it and founded a company called Deep Space Initiative. We're a nonprofit, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to make space more accessible by providing opportunities in education, in research.
My next goal is to create a foundation. I'm currently working with the Mexican Space Agency to draft up what this foundation is going to eventually look like, to start supporting those individuals that are interested in STEM and interested in joining the space industry within Mexico.
Hi, I'm Sarisha Bandla. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Research Operations at Virgin Galactic. Also, I'm astronaut 004 at Virgin Galactic. It was amazing. When my name was announced as a part of the Unity 22 crew, the amount of messages I got, especially from young women in India, that just talked to me about being an inspiration. And it wasn't necessarily, I've seen you go to space, I'm gonna go to space now. It was, hey, it's so great to see someone from a community like mine do incredible things.
You're kind of a big deal in India nowadays, no?
My Instagram definitely says so.
Oh my God.
I can't wait till we send up lawyers and professional communicators and artists to space, because they'll go through that transformative experience.
Please return to your seats and strap in. Approaching re-entry.
I cannot imagine anyone's gonna come back to Earth the same as they were before. I came back to Earth energized, just completely energized.
Just look at this new generation of astronauts. They are already having an impact in India, Mexico, and Egypt. And they're just getting started.
I'm Kelly Girardi. I'm a citizen scientist, and I'm flying to space on a dedicated research mission with Virgin Galactic. I'm going to be conducting bioastronautics research. I'm going to be conducting healthcare experiments and fluid experiments in space. One of the most emotional parts of this journey is seeing it through the eyes of my 4-year-old daughter, Delta V.
Guys, this is important. My mommy's gonna be an astronaut. She could go space.
Delta is growing up with this new framework. She believes that going to space is just something moms do, and I love that. We need to have more accurate representation of humanity be a part of that.
One of our major goals here and our commitment is to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in terms of our workforce. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that, we're bringing in diverse classes of interns.
Katja was one of those interns, and look at her now. She's already being immortalized as a Barbie. Just like Neil Armstrong and the other Apollo superstars were part of the cultural zeitgeist in their time.
We know when we have a diverse workforce that we are going to be more successful. And so it's really exciting to know that for the Artemis mission, the next humans going to the moon will be the first woman and the first person of color.
As we break through the galactic glass ceiling, maybe diversity in space means more than where you're from, your skin color, or your gender.
So one of the realities that we face here on Earth is that 1 out of every 5 individuals on the planet right now has some kind of measurable, significant disability. My name is Dr. Sherry Wells Jensen, and I study astrobiology and disability studies and how those two things intersect with one another. We can't say, oh, we're cool with only 80% of humanity combating global warming or working on all the other problems that we have. We need all of us. We need our best people on every job, including space, not just our best people who happen to also not have a disability.
If I was legally blind, you wouldn't let me pilot this car. But if I was, say, unable to speak, you would still consider me capable of driving, right? Now, in space, this notion of what is and what isn't a disability is about to get turned upside down.
What these super qualified, highly paid individuals have to do with 2 hours of their day is exercise. So if you have someone who is not worried about losing muscle mass, at least in their legs, does that decrease the amount of time that they need to exercise? Do they need to exercise at all? What is that accommodation that we need to make a zero-gravity environment accessible to a disabled scientist whose job is to go to space and get their work done? In 2021, in October, we chartered our first zero-G parabolic flight with the Zero-G Corporation, and we sent 12 disabled people. We had some deaf folks, some blind folk, and our mobility crew, which are our wheelchair users and our folks with prosthetics. Most fun anyone's ever had in their life is to be in lunar gravity. Not gonna lie, we should all go do it. And we figured out some tasks that we thought might be initial investigations that we wanted to do. What it revealed to us is that there's a lot that we have to learn, and we know how to do it now.
Dylan is one of the benefactors of Astro Access, and many other space companies are supporting the cause.
Why space? Well, because it benefits Earth. And oh, by the way, space is going to happen whether we want it or not. And I'd rather shape that future and make sure that humanity 2.0 is a better version of what we've been.
These are the new faces of New Space. And they've got the right stuff. Okay, so reusability and other rocket technologies are elevating the Earth to space sector. But now, the downstream space to Earth economy is also seeing dramatic leaps in innovation. This enables entirely new business models.
Satellites have been around for a very long time. Actually, not very far from here, just after World War II, a young scientist called Arthur C. Clarke first described how they could act like a very large cell tower. Today, we know him as a towering figure of science fiction, and his principle as geosynchronous orbit, or GEO for short.
And if you think about it militarily, it is the ultimate high ground, right? If you have superior assets in space, you really control the battlefield. Maybe a bit of Hobbesian fear about what the other person might be doing.
That's why the first generation of satellites was commandeered by men in uniform to spy on adversaries. Get this, decades before photography was digital and ground stations could receive data, actual film canisters had to be ejected from up high, slowed down by mini thrusters and then caught mid-air by planes. Crazy. Anyway, spy satellites were soon joined by communications and observation satellites. They offered services for the public. Weather forecasts typically brought to you by the government, and broadcast television usually provided by private businesses.
All right, so this is Viasat, Mark, take 1. So, who are you?
Hi, I'm Mark Dankberg. I'm one of the founders of Viasat, and I'm the CEO and chairman.
It's been around for a little longer than 2 or 3 years, don't you?
Yeah, 36 and a half years since we started the company, yeah. We had a really good technical understanding of satellite. We did a lot of defense stuff. We didn't have any money. We started in my house, and there were 3 of us.
A startup story from the 1980s. Today, Viasat is a multi-billion-dollar business with over 6,000 employees. They are all about very large communication assets in GEO that require very large investments. But haven't we been told the polar opposite?
Satellites like these used to be the size of a minibus. It took nation-states hundreds of millions of dollars to launch and operate them. Today, a CubeSat can be as small as this.
So that little box is called 1U.
And everybody wants to have one, or a few thousand.
A small fridge size, the size of a microwave, the size of a loaf of bread.
The size of a pizza box.
Maybe 2 shoe boxes.
Sheldon, there you are. Clearly, precision manufacturing with the latest components is one of the key drivers in this industry.
So this is the star camera. The solar rays fold flat.
This really interesting disruption happening in the industry where Moore's law was starting to arrive in space. And the incumbent space industry at that time hadn't quite noticed this massive disruption that was coming.
Today, Spire Global operates a constellation of more than 100 nanosatellites that are specialized in radio frequency technology and manufactured in Scotland, a place with a history in electronics. Though the physics challenges for these devices are out of this world.
Traveling at 8 kilometers per second, which means it goes around our planet every 90 minutes. So you go into the hot side where you're plus 100 Celsius to the cold side, minus 40 Celsius. You can imagine the engineering challenge that presents between making sure your electronics will function at all these temperatures, making sure that thermal fatigue, expansion and contraction every 90 minutes doesn't cause problems.
Planet runs the largest constellation of optical satellites. Founded back in 2010, they kept improving the hard and software.
Did you literally start in a garage, or is it just a marketing?
No, it's not marketing rumor. We started in a garage.
So since then,
literally had to sweep the leaves out in the morning. It wasn't a very clean room like.
So you built many iterations and generations of these satellites. So help me understand roughly like the performance increase that you managed to achieve.
Roughly over the period of from our first satellite to our latest satellite today, we've had about a 10,000-fold increase in performance. So that means in terms of the amount of imagery produced per day, per dollar spent. And a 10,000 increase is just, it's crazy, right? I mean, very rarely does that sort of thing happen. Once somebody said, oh, this is like Model T Ford. It's the first mass manufactured satellite. I mean, and I looked up, and actually the Model T Ford was about 2 to 3 times lower cost than the lowest cost car at that time. So this is not 2 or 3x lower cost. This is hundreds, if not thousands of times lower cost for the same sort of capability. That is closer to the revolution in IT when it went from mainframe computers to desktop computers. That's the kind of shift we're talking about that's happening in space today.
Shelley, how about a 2 p.m. booster?
Satellites I've worked on in the past have cost up to $500 million. So now with a CubeSat, for example, you could be launching into space for, say, $100,000 or $200,000.
The entire fleet of satellites we've ever launched is much lower cost than a single typical satellite from NASA or anyone else.
That makes mega constellations.
I hate using the word constellation because that's our word. Constellations don't move. They're like there, and the ancients have seen them, and we have stories about them, and they took that word to describe satellites, yes. Okay? To describe too many satellites.
Right. As I was saying, these low-cost consumer electronic components make mega constellations economically viable.
The OneWeb, Project Kuiper, Starlink, there are definitely differences in them that I won't get into right now. But the idea is they're all trying to offer a service that is similar to what we would have thought of as satellite internet, but it is different. It's designed to work in places that are harder to reach, or that are in conflict, or that are more mobile. And so my parents are RVers. You know, they drive around the country in one of those big rigs. And without me ever mentioning Starlink or any of these companies to them, they were discussing with me the various reasons why this service might be better than this service. No one ever says that 60-year-old Americans are the first adopters of a lot of things, but we're seeing that, as well as hopefully these services be adopted in countries where they are filling an even more critical gap.
Like providing connectivity that cannot be shut off, even in war. Starlink is getting a lot of attention and is already generating a ton of cash. But internet from space isn't new at all.
So, Mark, basically I'm coming here to this place. The whole day is for this one question, okay? People in this industry have been telling me the cost to build a satellite is a couple $100,000, the size of this, and you're building a $2 billion fleet of 3 satellites. Are you crazy?
No. When you're really close to the Earth, your field of view is small. What turns out is the farther away you go from Earth, the more of it you can see. So now I'm accessible, instead of just to this small area underneath me, I'm accessible to a very large market.
Hey, this is Galactic Gal. Let me take it over from here. Compared to LEO, the geosynchronous orbit is about 100 times farther from Earth, and satellites there are all circling the planet in the same direction. Think of it as a fixed parking position. Some very powerful satellites are here because it's almost always sunny. Viasat's rationale for GEO is also based on the technical ability to focus its beam on areas where the demand is. In fact, 95% of the world population lives on only 10% of the land. In other words, the majority of economic activity happens on only 3% of our blue planet's surface. We can see human activity with a naked eye at night. From GEO, all these markets can be served with very few satellites. Meanwhile, in low Earth orbit, the new space constellations are spending most of their time over oceans and unpopulated areas where there are no customers. Moreover, they are in the shade half of the time each round trip. Their position in very low orbit brings the benefits of much lower launch costs and lower latency, but this also means a much smaller field of view. That's why so many are needed to offer reliable communication services.
But there are more use cases than just internet connectivity. This UK-based fund has deployed around $300 million in over 100 different companies.
And our thesis at Seraphim is that that is now creating a digital infrastructure in the sky. So this is about space looking down at planet Earth. This digital infrastructure, which is made up of hundreds and thousands of satellites, are able to collect data, a tsunami of data that they're collecting about our planet in high resolution, low cost, and importantly, real time or close to real time. And we believe that this digital infrastructure is a bit like the creation of a new internet. This is creating a $1 trillion market opportunity.
In other words, different constellations for different markets. There's optical, radar, infrared, so many different technologies serving different customer needs. In a dark forest, mein Freund Sven has identified a market opportunity. He's building a business based on all this new data.
And how can you help me not have train delays?
That's a great question. So what we do is we analyze satellite data and identify precisely where trees are standing too close to railway tracks and where they could fall potentially on them. The trees is one of the biggest reasons why trains are being delayed. We can identify where the trees are, how tall they are, whether they are sick. So what we do is we take 2 satellite images which are taken from slightly different angles. And from these 2 satellite images, we calculate the height of the tree. It works very similar to your human eye. So your eyes can calculate depth.
Ha! 3D glasses for satellites. Brilliant. Live.io has raised one of the largest space investment rounds in Europe. They already protect millions of miles of railway tracks and electrical grids globally. With their help, I'll make it to my next destination on time. A former American spy station in Berlin, Teufelsberg.
Locations like this remind us that governments have been spying on other governments and sometimes their own citizens for a very long time.
But finally, space data can empower us to look back at government activities with a virtual time machine.
I think our data in general can be very empowering for journalists around the world. It's a tool that enables them to see what's going on. There's a great case where some journalists from BuzzFeed had used our data to discover Uyghur detention camps.
Mega is an investigative journalist who was based in China for many years until somehow her visa wasn't extended.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for catching that.
Satellite data helped her and 2 collaborators to get to the truth on the ground, and they won a Pulitzer for it.
So basically, the process started actually with Baidu Maps, where we noticed that the government was essentially putting grayed out tiles over a number of locations in Xinjiang.
Low-resolution images that look like this. Mega and her team suspected that the Chinese government was censoring Baidu Maps to hide prison camps holding Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Ultimately, they used high-resolution images from Planet to identify several hundred new prison and detainment centers.
We won the Pulitzer Prize in 2021. We were really grateful for that award because it brought a lot more attention to the work than I think it would have otherwise gotten.
It's mind-boggling to me how this panopticon could have changed world history. Think about the Cuban Missile Crisis or the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Again, it comes to accountability. I think it will change the political calculus going forward if everyone gets to know that these things aren't going to be possible to hide anymore.
So let's imagine a world where traffic jams, oil spills, troop movements, bouncy castles, everything can be seen and verified by everyone, almost in real time. Journalists, the open source intelligence community on Reddit, the good guys, the bad guys, me and you.
But yes, we work with the military, and I want to say this about this. We do that on purpose, in good faith, because we believe that it will enhance peace and security. With one important caveat, we will never do it exclusively. We will not give this image to this client with saying, I will never give this to anyone else. If the New York Times also wants access to that image, they can also get access to that image. If the UN and this NGO wants access to that image, they can also get access to that image.
But can't the bad guys hide in the dark? Well, turns out there's a SAT for that.
Real-time SAR.
Which is a form of radar.
That is something that can be looked through the clouds, through the darkness, through rain, through snowfall. You don't need the optical light. In the Arctic areas where you have the darkness, half of the year, or if you go to an area like the Amazon where there's a lot of rain all the time, it doesn't matter when you have a radar constellation, but also many other layers of data, including geographical data, stuff like meteorological reports and things like that, where we help the insurance companies to predict a flood development. We support the Finnish icebreakers in the Bay of Bothnian area. We take images, how the ice develops, you name it, a lot of different types of use cases.
So optical satellites look at the outside of the building. Infrared gives you an inference on what's going on inside. So it sort of opens the box. It's a new category of Earth observation data. If you're a housing association, then you would be interested in this data to make sure that your portfolio is getting to net zero.
The tech is maturing. It can defeat darkness, peek through clouds, or locate leaky windows. And there's even a Canadian company that can detect cow farts from space. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Eat your veggies.
We have a huge vision going forward to enable this transition to a sustainable economy and a secure world.
Climate tech, a $1 trillion opportunity for Earth observation companies.
We have fantastic investors.
One of Planet's latest investors is BlackRock, the world's largest asset firm.
They're trying to demand all their companies track their ESG. The E in ESG is environment.
Yeah, and what's good for the planet is good for planet, right?
Well, that's also true.
I mean, I remember that first Earth Day, and that view from space back looking at our planet that kind of became the beginning of the environmental movement, that we are just one part of the greater universe. And how do we make sure that we survive? There were a lot of things that came up, a new awareness, a new consciousness.
Now, to live long and prosper, humans and Vulcans need a healthy planet. Climate science relies heavily on satellite data. Using AI, we can now zero in, identify and analyze billions of individual trees.
So space diplomacy and space information is critical. Climate change is a global problem. We can't solve it without global data, without that big picture view of what's happening on our planet, and making sure that every country is meeting their pledges and that globally we're able to meet our targets for keeping within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming.
Actually, over half of the users are scientific communities worldwide, and they have published over the last few years more than 2,000 papers, research papers, theses, and also white papers.
Legal fishing, another great example. We are plundering the oceans now. There are many bad actors in the ocean, and the only way we can tell how much they're impacting the ocean is by following their tracks in space.
So one of our portfolio companies, Hawkeye 360, they are the largest constellation of radio frequency signal intelligence satellites. So that means that they're able to monitor signals from walkie-talkies or mobile phones.
When a boat switches off their beacon, Spire Global notices it and notifies Hawkeye 360. Their small sats can detect and document the dark vessel's activities.
And they're able to then use that information to hold the owners of that boat to account.
Yeah.
So this can ultimately eradicate things like illegal fishing, but it can also work on other areas.
Like drug or human trafficking. Next stop, Ecuador, where they make heavenly coffee. And where agriculture is critical to the economy.
The total size of our pineapple farm is 230 acres. We produce 7 to 8 shipping containers every week. About 70% of it is exported overseas, 30% is for domestic sales.
I had asked an Irish company, Origin Digital, to do a thorough biomass analysis of Emilio's fields. This is what I am showing him here.
So one of the many challenges that farmers have is to be able to keep an eye on the crops and how the crops are developing seamlessly. So they have to walk miles and miles to be able to find that out, and that too, they do not have bird's eye view of the entire thing.
Marumita says that their sophisticated analytics can help Emilio to understand where a pest might be spreading, where he should use more or less fertilizers, or adjust irrigation when the moisture levels aren't right. This is a potential game changer.
If the farmers are using our optimal technology and software, that yield can increase to around 11.5 tons per hectare, which is like straight away 38% increase. That is phenomenal.
This would be a useful tool as we would save money on a lot of factors like analysis in laboratories. We technicians could manage everything here on the ground, and that would be invaluable.
We are the top quality producers of fruit-based products in Ecuador, such as pulps, jams, toppings that are used in the food industry. We have clients in the dairy, in the ice cream industries. In the food industry, we use not high-tech technology, but we should start moving over there. Resources are very limited, water, soil, and the population keeps growing, so therefore we need to look for better and higher technology to introduce to our sector.
Okay, drones make me kind of nervous. I'm out of here. EO constellations, the hardware, and machine learning, the software, make monitoring millions of farms possible on a daily basis.
So defense and climate are connected. As the climate changes, there will be droughts, wildfires, and other natural disasters, which might lead to migration of people, which is obviously a security issue.
No matter where I go in this industry, national security is always close by.
Tell me about the CIA venture capital fund, the involvement there.
They don't like to be called the CIA fund. One of our investors is Incutel, that represents the US defense intelligence community. So they allow us to sell our data and open doors to those agencies that are interested in intelligence as a whole.
I hear echoes of my meeting with the co-inventor of the internet. It was also funded by the Pentagon. That's the thing. Defense isn't a dirty word in space. Satellites protect ecosystems, but also connect weapon systems. Developed by the Department of Defense and still operated by the US Space Force, GPS is the one space service that everyone uses daily. And now, startups see an opportunity in the satellite navigation market. This one, funded by Lockheed Martin and Toyota, wants to enhance the accuracy of GPS to a few centimeters.
Aren't you competing with like the biggest and most powerful governments in the world, China, Russia, the US, and the European? They all have their own GPS.
So we're not competing with GNSS actually. What we're doing is that we are augmenting GPS. So autonomous vehicles, they need to know precisely where they are on the road, what lane they are on the road, and where within that lane they are.
All these satellites need a place to beam back the data. Contact is a South Korean company that operates a global network of ground stations like these. Clients include Viasat and ICEYE, allowing them to focus on things other than building dishes in remote places. So how many constellation pitch decks have you seen and watched, and how many are there being built right now?
We get to see around 100 a month, and we have consistently since 2016. So that's thousands of businesses around the world that are looking to develop technology solutions to address this market.
It doesn't take a genius to predict that the number of satellites is going to take off. Our mate Arthur C. Clarke wrote about accumulating space junk back in the 1970s. You probably remember this from my previous documentary. Before mass production and standardization, cars used to be just toys for rich people, really. Well, at one point, satellites used to be the size of cars and were so complex and expensive that only a handful of countries could afford them.
Well, those costs are now plunging. So just like on our roads, where space is congested and contested, LEO is getting so crowded we may need to check for traffic.
We don't put satellites in random places. We put them on very specific orbital highways. Just like regular highways have a finite capacity for space traffic, each of these orbital highways has a carrying capacity as well for safety and sustainability.
It's really quite shocking when you think about it. We're racing into this domain and we don't actually know what its carrying capacity is.
With low Earth orbit, you have satellites that are crossing in space at 15,000 miles an hour. The speed at which things happen and the consequences of a collision are enormously worse. Nobody cleans up after you in space.
Let's go back in time when plastic was invented, right? And became a significant commodity in the packaging of goods.
Everywhere.
Nobody's thinking, one day we're going to have to get this plastic out of the ocean. We were just throwing away plastic.
Compared to plastic in the ocean, though, space junk is a lot faster and more lethal. You see, at this speed, it will take me an hour to cross the city. Satellites do it in a second.
Everything in orbit is traveling at the same speed of around 25,000 kilometers an hour. That's more than 4 miles per second. Anything faster would reach escape velocity and maybe the moon. Anything slower would be pulled back by Earth's gravity. This constant high speed is the reason why even small objects are lethal.
Yeah, so even a piece of debris the size of a 10p coin can cause catastrophic damage to a satellite.
These two satellites cross paths every 90 minutes, tens of thousands of times during their operational life. Even if these two never collide, there are thousands of other objects to worry about.
Astroscale has been on my radar for a while. This Japanese company wants to mitigate cascading collisions in orbit.
We're not going to pick up all those small pieces. What we need to do is stop the big pieces from becoming small pieces. Because even the small pieces are a significant risk, and that could destroy a satellite or destroy a space station.
What we're seeing here, this is kind of scary to think about something like this re-entering and like maybe hitting a populated area. We see more and more of these big rocket bodies that are re-entering.
Objects in low Earth orbit naturally fall back down after about 20 years due to small atmospheric drag. But space stations, geosatellites, or debris in higher orbits will be in space for a much longer time.
Some generals don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. In order to show off their fire prowess and accuracy, they've created even more debris on purpose.
Space junk from a Russian anti-satellite weapons test is threatening 7 astronauts aboard the International Space Station.
In the middle of that test, in the immediate aftermath, we knew that there was a debris cloud in the vicinity of the International Space Station, but the data doesn't come in that fast, and so trying to understand the immediate danger to the astronauts was not easy to do.
And the irony is, I think there were Russian astronauts at this group.
2 of the 7, yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's sort of the plausible deniability, oh, they were never in risk, and the reality is we didn't know.
The test has so far generated over 1,500 pieces of trackable orbital debris and hundreds of thousands of pieces of smaller orbital debris that now threaten the interests of all nations.
I know that also the US has done similar tests in the 50s and 60s.
Sure. You know, honestly, the last test that we did really was in 1985. We shot a satellite and then we said, we don't think we're going to do that anymore.
That all doesn't matter if China or Russia doesn't comply with any of what you guys are talking about here today, right?
So what the Chinese choose to do, what the Russians choose to do, that's on them, all right? We know that they the Russian ASAT test, right? That was completely inappropriate.
Experts estimate that there are more than 100 million pieces that are way too small to detect. Plus, even for the medium-sized objects, we have a problem because we don't know how they tumble and spin.
Things move a certain way, mostly due to gravity or curvature of space-time, but then also there's everything else about how the sun is exerting forces and pressures on objects, and we are hindered in our ability to predict where these things are going to be at some point in the future.
Okay, to recap, this garbage grows exponentially and travels lethally fast. Deliberate or accidental crashes can cause cascading Kessler effects, and to make things even worse, we don't even know where most of it is in time and space. No matter how much I squint, I get the remote sense that solutions need to start with better data. Some already work on improving situational awareness.
So Privateer, it's a platform company co-founded by myself, Steve Wozniak, and Alex Fielding. Just like an iPhone is a platform that has apps, we would love to have people from across humanity exposed to the data and information in Privateer's platform.
Another company, Leo Labs, is already generating 1 billion conjunction alerts per month. But even with perfect vision, you still have to maneuver to safety when necessary. Eutelsat is one of the most important companies in this field. We got exclusive access to this mission control center. With the recent acquisition of OneWeb, this 40-year-old European company is taking on Starlink. Eutelsat wants to bridge the digital divide from multiple orbits.
So if there is a problem on the satellite, this ground control system will automatically detect that there has been a violation of the threshold and will trigger an alarm. We are performing manual collision avoidance, but it's most likely with other satellites that are uncontrolled in the geostationary orbit.
You said earlier you need to react fast. Are we talking hours? Are we talking seconds?
No, we are talking in real time, which means immediately. Immediately. It's less than every second.
So you can imagine the resources that you need to pull through to have the right people here 24/7, making sure that they are able to react. It costs money.
We don't have the right to make mistakes because it would be fatal.
But there's good news. For starters, bureaucrats and lawyers, yes, you heard right, are starting to lay the groundwork.
My name is Niklas Hedman, and I'm now acting director of the Office for Outer Space Affairs of the United Nations. If you create space debris, you can be hit by it yourself, you see. If you want a long-term investment to really benefit your company, then you have to act responsibly.
25 years ago, it was just NASA, it was just ESA, it was just JAXA. It was a few countries that were launching. Now, you'll have a satellite that's built in country A, it's launched in country B, it's being insured in country C, it's getting a license from country D, and it's being managed by country E. Just the basics of what is up there, it's multinational.
Space sustainability is fundamental. We can't get all the amazing benefits of space, and they are truly amazing, if space is so congested that it's too dangerous to be up there, right? So there's nothing more important to the world than making sure that the space is sustainable for now and for future generations. So we've put that right at the top of the priority list for the UK.
For instance, in 2019, this intergovernmental body adopted the long-term sustainability guidelines. It took 10 years to negotiate that instrument, 21 guidelines.
The Vienna spirit is the idea that even though things may be tense outside the negotiating room, that you come together and that you compromise and you do it for the good of the goal, which is either nuclear safeguards or the peaceful use of outer space.
But new space companies like to move fast, and you guys are pretty slow at getting anything done, no?
We are slow. However, there is no other consensus platform that deals with these issues in the world.
Meanwhile, the first fuel stations on the orbital highways are already planned and funded.
So a very large percentage of satellites, well over 50%, they reach the end of their life because they ran out of fuel, not because their hardware is obsolete or something else happened to them. It's because they simply just ran out of fuel.
No one would ever leave their car stranded if it ran out of fuel, so extending the life of these spacecraft sounds like a no-brainer to me. There are already test missions underway to power up some probes.
Cars, airplanes, washing machines, everything is serviced after it gets sold. Satellites aren't. Satellites are launched and there's no intention to service them. Once they launch, they're gone. You're not going to see them again. That's going to change.
We are launching our first fuel demonstration mission to prove out the refueling port and to prove out the fuel transfer so that we can start refueling our customers.
So the way you've been selling me this is you are solving one of the biggest issues in the space industry, but what you actually have at the moment is just a 500-gram little widget. Isn't that a little bit too much hype?
No, not at all. So we have been baselined already in 2022 on 4 Department of Defense satellites and then 91 commercial satellites as well. So there's already a huge demand for it.
That's some real customer traction for this startup right there.
So today, absolutely 0 satellites that are in geosynchronous orbit have refueling capability.
But not everyone is convinced.
In fact, in any orbit, no satellites have refueling capability.
Space Logistics is an ambitious entity inside a mega corporation of 90,000 employees. Welcome to what some call the military-industrial complex, old space.
Yeah, so Northrop Grumman has quite a long history in aerospace industry, especially in space, actually providing some of the key elements that landed men on the moon.
The Eagle has landed.
Back in the 1960s. I deorbited dozens of spacecraft, and I always felt like such a gravedigger every time I was pushing one of those perfectly good satellites out to service simply because it ran out of fuel. Well, we don't have to do that anymore with the MEV-1 and MEV-2 that can extend the life of those satellites.
The big idea? Instead of refueling, why not simply attach as a jetpack and take over control?
You just mentioned GEO, and I thought all the action is in LEO.
Yeah, well, GEO is where the money is. And so it's very exciting after 19 years to be sitting in this control center, seeing that Intelsat 901 coming up very close on the screen, full size, being right there in front of us, knowing that we're now docking to that satellite and extending the life. Something we never dreamed of 20 years ago when we first launched it.
Is it possible to do this with any satellite?
So those two key interfacing features, the liquid apogee engine and the launch adapter ring, are present on approximately 80% of all satellites in geosynchronous orbit. And it should be compatible with nearly all of those.
Life extension services for satellites are an important part of space sustainability. Removing pieces of debris safely is another, even bigger challenge that needs to be confronted head-on.
Our tagline is the space sweepers, right? So we like to kind of think about, in the same way if your car breaks down on the roadside, you call up the car breakdown service and they'll come and take it off the highway. We're looking at doing the same thing with satellites.
Astroscale's plan is to maneuver close to defunct satellites and grab them. With almost $400 million of venture capital, they might actually be able to pull it off.
If you think about it, this is the ultimate tragedy of the commons. Sure, there's exciting technology on the horizon, but let's be honest, at the moment there are no binding international rules in place and no punishment for polluters. We can't even keep the rubbish off of our street or recycle our consumer electronic devices.
But when small sets get cheaper and cheaper to make and deploy, they are also cheaper to replace.
If reuse, reduce, recycle is more expensive than litter and relaunch, then are we becoming a spacefaring throwaway society?
Probably better to be responsible stewards of near Earth.
I'd like to think that in 10, 20 years, we look back and we say, glad we did it, just in the nick of time.
So I work at NASA Johnson Space Center, and we are what is called the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility. I am currently the Deputy Program Manager for the Commercial LEO Development Program here at NASA.
NASA's grants are the rocket fuel for the privatization of space. After the retirement of the ISS, there will be benefits to becoming a user rather than an owner of a space station.
It drives down costs for NASA, so we can take those funds and apply it to exploration, the exploration of the moon and exploration of Mars, which is really our main goal. $400 million over the next several years, that is NASA's investment in development of these commercial space stations. And beyond that, we will be procuring services from these commercial space stations at the tune of about $1.5 billion.
3 stations are in the running. We've already met Blue Origin. They are also designing a mixed-use business park called Orbital Reef for a crew of 10.
Axiom is one of those companies building such a station. They hired this guy to make it commercially viable. I'm sorry, you have a fly. Yeah, it's...
Got it. Very nice.
One shot. We don't fool around here.
I'm not a rocket scientist and I'm not a billionaire yet. I got my start in technology, software technology. I was a startup founder for 10 years, 3 different companies, web and mobile apps. And then I was working at Google for many years. And Axiom Space was my first angel investment. So in a few years, you'll see our first module dock. It's a habitat. A few months after that, the second module will dock, also a habitat. Then our lab, our Earth observatory, and then our power tower.
We're building the replacement to the International Space Station called Starlab. And that really validated, I think, our model, which is to acquire great companies, invest in technologies, and demonstrate our ability to build infrastructure in space.
The European Space Agency and Airbus, the world's largest manufacturer of airplanes, have joined as partners. Airbus is also a defense and space prime contractor. Starlab will be half the size of the ISS, but will fit nicely into a single Starship rocket. Northrop Grumman will also provide cargo supply. NASA might have provided the initial funding, but surely won't be the only customer on these private space stations. The market is expanding.
I think there's now 60+ space agencies in the world. Pretty much every major country has one, and they're starting to be well-funded and well-supported. And yeah, it's a renaissance for those space agencies. But we're still scoping out our designs. I think we'll be, in the single billions, certainly. It's hard for me to say for sure, but it's going to be several orders of magnitude less expensive than the International Space Station.
Still, financing these projects will be a massive lift. Axiom's latest investment round transcended borders and included capital from a Saudi bank and a South Korean healthcare company.
Axiom will be a $1 trillion company. How? I'll tell you the same answer I gave my board 3 weeks into my job. I don't know. But I'm certain we're going to figure it out.
Clearly, there's a gold rush happening right now. Maybe someone is already building a space hotel like the one I read about as a kid.
Well, we signed a partnership with Hilton, and as you reimagine human habitation in space, why not go to a habitation expert? So that's one strength that Hilton brings to the table.
I don't know how many stars this hotel will have in the Hitchhiker's Guide, but I'll take the penthouse with the views, please.
Second strength is they're spending a lot of money researching things like antimicrobial technology.
Finally, some peace and quiet, a real getaway. In the space elevator, I imagine how my stay would be like. For once, I'll hit the gym before sunrise and finally will improve my bench press. Here, I'll even weigh less.
And it's also a brand that everyone knows. And I think it lends credibility to the fact that this is happening.
I'll have my Ecuadorian coffee just over the equator and eat my yogurt while spying on the Great Wall of China. Oh, it's full of stars.
Well, it's going to be expensive. I hate to break it to you, Torsten. It's not going to be cheap.
It's definitely going here.
When you're hungry, there is no bigger food desert than space, a place where you cannot waste anything. So how can humans live here sustainably? Paris-based Interstellar Lab won the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge for their modular system Nucleus. Just add water.
So we're using actually the CO2 that is produced by mushroom to feed the plants. The plants are producing oxygen that goes into the insects and the mushroom box. And we use the inedible part of the plants to feed the insects, which create the substrate for the mushroom. So it's kind of a small ecosystem, just divided in different boxes, but trying to close the loop.
It turns out that you need about 55 square meters to sustain one human for 1 year with food and oxygen. Welcome to Barbara's Biopod. Personally, I'm still undecided about drinking recycled urine, and eating crickets, a bit hard to swallow, but I'm certainly a big fan of building a space business by first selling to terrestrial clients.
What we're doing now is we're working with very big natural ingredients company, cosmetic company, food companies as well, and we're growing rare species or endangered species or species that traditionally are not growing, where you live, inside the bubble. And so we're helping actually the food industry and natural ingredient industry growing plants in a more sustainable way because we use less water, because we scrap CO2, because it's a sealed bubble, and it was designed with this space-constrained engineering approach where you need to minimize the input and maximize the output.
There was a technique that was developed for freeze-drying food, which is actually the same technique we use now for food on board the ISS, but it's a technique that we use on Earth too. So that is a direct spin-off from, having to solve that problem for the Apollo astronauts.
It's doubtful that the Cold War taxpayers beating the Soviets to the moon ever thought that their grandkids would use space race tech to feed their families today.
The International Space Station is a beacon of international collaboration, and we have many nations, who send their astronauts. They eat together, they work together. We have many nations who send their experiments. School children send experiments to the International Space Station for astronauts to conduct research for them, and this spans the globe.
To fact-check this, I went down under to Australia.
And the high school sends us a team of their students, about 6 students, and those students work with our university students who are mentors to them. They have to research what they think would be an important microgravity-related experiment, and they research that, they design their own experiment, they test it here, and then they fly it to the International Space Station.
Last year, they decided to send yogurt to space because probiotics are incredibly important for your gut. Gut health in space is incredibly important and not well understood yet. So they hit several nails on the head with their idea.
So I think we were just putting milk samples in an incubator and then milk with yogurt and milk with probiotics. And we were seeing like the bacterial strains that would like develop over time.
With different dilutions, so from 1/10 to 1 billion?
Yeah. So we're going to open up some of the vials that have actually been to space, and we're going to see like the bacterial strains there.
My high school didn't catapult students into a career in science quite like this.
We actually just signed 6 agreements with Latin American countries. Everything from Mexico to Colombia, even Costa Rica. So you have all these emerging countries that want to have a space agency. They want to have national identity around space. They see it as a way to inspire students in STEM education.
But how does this relate to entirely new industries emerging?
We can't say exactly, well, what's going to be the next billion-dollar industry? Actually, I can. It's going to be pharmaceuticals in space.
Pharma giant Merck, known as MSD outside North America, was founded at the end of the 19th century. Merck has been able to develop more pure formulations on orbit.
Well, in microgravity, the particles remain suspended and therefore can grow more perfect in all 3 dimensions,
which could help improve cancer treatments.
I think that these companies miss the opportunities in research and development. Particle engineering, there's stem cell growth, there's organs grown in space.
Sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. But why make anything in space in the first place if the rockets are getting elongated and the shipping costs are falling? Well, here's an example. The European Space Agency needs very powerful antennas, and those need to be way longer than even the biggest pod bay doors are wide.
In the past, complicated folding mechanisms were needed. A little like an umbrella.
Your spacecraft is sitting nicely, so to speak, in a microgravity environment, so it doesn't need to be as strong as what you would build on Earth. So your structures can be lighter.
What if we could make materials up in space that would be impossible to produce back here on Earth?
For example, optical fibers with less defects than what you would get on Earth, semiconductor materials with less defects, metallic alloys, even superalloys, the kind of alloys we use in airplane engines, ceramics.
People say, well, there's not going to be enough demand to meet the launch capacity. And I reject that. I think capacity creates demand.
Build it and they will come.
Yes, but in this case, it really is true, Torsten, because the limiting factor has been essentially getting projects through the NASA system, astronaut time, and space manufacturing, biopharma research, ag tech. These are all leading edge research projects and programs that just need habitat. They need more space.
Before central bankers could just print money out of thin air, whoever controlled the gold mines would rule the lands. History is full of stories about explorers extending frontiers and extracting wealth from new continents. So perhaps it's time to revisit a far-out idea. Recently, NASA and Japan's JAXA have demonstrated the ability to navigate to and land on asteroids. Today, I'm traveling light. My little bird is taking me to a Californian company hunting for treasure.
The amount of platinum group metals out there is in the trillions of dollars. And that's just for a couple of asteroids, right? And we have millions of asteroids out there.
So this is a lab prototype of what we aim to build for space.
The vapors are ionized, so they're positively charged, and they get accelerated. So AstroForge is building a vehicle that's going to go out and extract material from asteroids, refine the material, and bring that refined material back to Earth. If this is successful, platinum will be as common as aluminum or iron or nickel. It would be a very common metal, right?
How certain are you that this survives launch and the vibration, the speed and the radiation?
To be clear, Astroforge is currently ride-sharing a small experimental payload with our friends from Exolaunch. These first tests are to demonstrate that refining platinum in microgravity could work. 2-year-long robotic round-trip missions are in the business plan by the end of the decade.
When we were doing Y Combinator, we had a myriad of investors wanting to invest and throw money at the company.
See, nothing is truly scarce in this universe. But you disapprove of galactic gold diggers? Personally, I find parachuting in platinum from outer space pretty cyberpunk, and much more palatable than obtaining it from rogue nations or by children slaving in underground mines. Yep, yet again, we're touching on geopolitical matters.
Some of these companies are now so huge and the billionaire founders behind them are so rich. Do governments still matter, or is it all about commercial space?
I mean, as a government employee, I definitely have to say the governments are still very much involved in kind of all aspects of this. And an interesting aspect of the Outer Space Treaty, which is really the foundational document for international space law, is that it states that governments are responsible for the activities of their nationals in space.
Apparently, SpaceX does not want to commit to these rules when it comes to the free people of Mars. If the planets align, we'll cover that in our sequel. But let's not forget that it's not a pale blue flag for all mankind on the moon. The American eagle had landed.
When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, he was sent by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. There was some private investment in there, but the motivation was geopolitical, okay? And by the way, Queen Isabella didn't say, oh, Chris, when you come back, give us a slideshow of the plants and the terrain. No, it's like, here's a satchel of flags. Plant them wherever you go.
China and Russia are very active in space. The United States is very active in space. A lot of countries are. And I think the important thing is that nations that are active in space behave responsibly, they behave sustainably.
For US-based companies in general, China's completely off limits, really for regulatory reasons. What I see happening, Torsten, is we're gonna have two different space economies. We're gonna have a Western, US-led space economy, and then you'll have a Chinese-led space economy. And I think those will be quite distinct, and I don't see a lot of overlap there.
Hi, Torsten, nice to meet you.
I think there's a historical perspective to be had here because the way the Chinese understand the history of the 18th, 19th, 20th century is that China did not stand their ground on the geopolitical scene, and so it was the Western powers that sort of established the way the world works today.
Jean has lived in the region for half of his life and is an expert on the Chinese space economy.
There was an interesting poll a couple of years ago. They basically asked the young population in the UK, in the US, and in China, what would you like to do when you grow up? And the answer in China was being a taikonaut, being an astronaut.
China, take 3. Meanwhile, the kids in the West dream of becoming influencers on Instagram or professional TikTokers. Perhaps it's no wonder that China's the clear number 2 in the modern space race.
The Guoan constellation announced last year, we're talking about almost 13,000 satellites, and that's comparable to the super constellations that we have in the US, which, Starlink, OneWeb, Kuiper. It's a similar order of magnitude.
But here's the twist. The private space entrepreneurs in communist China are jealous of their capitalist counterparts in America because they are not getting those juicy government grants.
You don't see any of those subsystems, at least for the time being subcontracted, being outsourced to these private companies, these commercial companies. So that is one big difference, and that is a significant difference that enabled SpaceX to survive and to grow in the late 2000s.
So it's time to ask just how much of the space renaissance is really the achievement of free enterprise if most of the revenue still comes from Uncle Sam. Maybe commercial space doesn't necessarily mean private demand.
When Elon Musk first sent cargo to the space station, there were headlines, "New era private industry is going to lead the way." No, they're not. Taking cargo to the space station, NASA's been doing that for 20 years.
So it's not a dirty secret that governments are the primary revenue source. The whole reason this new space industry is coming up is because the government wants the private sector to do it, because the private sector can do it faster. The private sector can iterate and experiment and find these other markets.
It's an interesting, fun future, a little bit of a Wild West right now.
The Wild West always reminds me of the historic gold rushes in California, Australia, or soon an asteroid near you. The upside of fresh capital is new jobs globally.
We have 40 startups in our accelerator program. More than half of them come from other countries. There are close to 2,000 jobs created in Singapore. They're high value adding jobs in a very, very niche and competitive, but very exciting industry.
So we're at the front end of a very steep slope. I mentioned earlier, 700 employees at Firefly. Well, we've estimated that in the next 10 years, we're going to need 10 times as many employees in space than currently work there today.
In this industry, not even the sky is the limit.
£16.5 billion of income, 47,000 jobs. So it's phenomenally highly skilled jobs. But here's the thing, I think sometimes people think space and think, oh, that's only for the astronauts, that's only for the astrophysicists. We could not be further from the truth. We need the designers, the artists, the human resources professional, the engineers.
A filmmaker, whether it's a diplomat, whether it's an engineer, whether it's a space station manager or an artist or a botanist.
We've got designers, we've got architects, we've got even mechanics who want to build fuel stations in space. We've got bankers interested. We've got fashion designers interested.
One of the reasons that I chose this area to focus on and to fund is the idea that space from the beginning of time has been our source of inspiration. You know, we've looked to the heavens. Working together, you know, space can help us find that ground of connectedness that we all have and hopefully bring out our better angels.
Dinosaurs found out the hard way that if you don't have a space program, you may go extinct. I'm meeting the guy who's building LifeShip, a company that wants to preserve humanity's DNA. It's fitting that we are here in the ocean where life began.
Yeah, where life began and then came out onto land. Gaia and Earth wants to reproduce. And so with LifeShip, what we're doing is we're assembling the genetic code of Earth and humanity to send to space and to send to the stars. So we created a consumer product. Customer registers online and they build out their profile of who they are for people to send their DNA to space, kind of like a digital twin backup of yourself. There's a guide with a number of facts on the mission and how it gets to the moon, a boarding pass to the moon, and then there's a saliva swab that you do a sample and then put it back in this envelope and mail it back for the LifeShip mission.
The DNA isn't sequenced, it's extracted and encased in polymer, then sealed in a capsule that protects it from radiation.
It's someone like a Noah's Ark to the stars. This is a record of Earth today that future generations could get and bring back species that are no longer here.
Yeah, in a way, your company and the kit is sort of like the smallest and cheapest consumer product, the most easy to grasp idea that I've seen in my whole journey. Very, very cool story.
Together with many other precious species, Sheldon's genetic code is aboard Ben's LifeShip, which is mounted on a Firefly moonlander, which is powered by Rocket Lab-made solar panels and launched on a SpaceX rocket on a private mission, primarily financed by a new commercial NASA program. Bringing us back full circle. Millions love space and follow every rocket launch live. I ask you, which other industry captures our collective imagination like that? Space has always had a different kind of ROI, return on inspiration.
It's hard to understand today a sort of multi-year slow motion race that captivated the entire planet. And first we were losing and we were behind the Soviets, then we were winning. The imagery was beautiful, seeing people floating in space for the first time. So it was easy to be captivated as a young kid.
I was 3 or 4 years old, literally, and I was fascinated by the Star Trek ecosystem.
I think the first time that I really got into space was when I was a kid. I read a lot of space books.
You know, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and as a little girl, I was really excited and really good at math and science.
My parents took me to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. and I saw that gigantic building, and my dad said, that's where they make rockets. And it was as if my mind, my heart, and my soul exploded at the same time. And you don't forget moments like that in your life.
Ever since I was very young, maybe 9 or 10, I was actually lying in the back of my dad's pickup truck in rural Georgia, looking up at the stars.
And to see a young child in the next generation growing up knowing that not even the sky is the limit, what a gift to be able to provide to her.
When I was a kid, I was dreaming of becoming multiplanetary, so making drawings of domes and structures on other planets, full of plants and flowers.
For me, I have always had really big dreams. And as a child, it's easy to say, I want to go to space, I want to be president, I want to be a CEO.
And her journey started at McDonald's. See, what I learned making this documentary is that it's not the billionaires against the rest of us.
Thanks for humanity, we're here!
It's not about public versus private initiatives. This is all about those who are effectively accelerating us into the future. Our story always has and always will be written by those who imagine any new space as a blank canvas. However, their lofty dreams still need to be tethered to the hard realities on the ground below, like cash. Space businesses are still, well, businesses. So many startups will crash and burn, but some will be making a galactic profit.
Pass that off to private enterprise because they'll figure out how to do it cheaper because that's kind of what they do. That's why they exist, to make a buck.
Now I'm returning to Fortitude HQ, having seen early but thriving markets and real customer traction.
And this is the end, take 4. So let's just imagine for a sec our next giant leap off this rock.
Perhaps then humans way in the future, those spacefaring Homo sapiens, who for sure will be force of gravity defying and Elon edifying, habitats finding and shiny asteroids mining. These supreme beings of all shapes and sizings, maybe even blind and with their trillion-dollar spaceships and their microgravity-bred protein dips.
Yes, those future Homo sapiens, Homo spacians, will look back at us ancestors and be thanking us. Not just the 4 or 5 famous dudes, no, the rest of us, the best of us who possess the mental fortitude. From our high school kids' science fairs to boomers boosted into cislunar nursing cares.
Our climate defenders and metal benders, the bureaucrats, plutocrats, diplomats, copycats, the engineers and marketeers, the musketeers and pioneers, the privateers and financiers. We're not mere passengers here on Spaceship Earth. For what it's worth, me and you, we're all crew. Because the science gals and rocket fellas have no time to kill to see their dreams fulfilled. Today is day 1, and it's time to build.